As it would take some time to clear away the ships strewn over the riverbed, the Sorcerer King and Lady Shaltir returned to the Sorceress Kingdom to attend to matters there. Though the water elemental monoliths had long advanced downriver, Ludmilla did not fly over to watch their progress. It was His Majesty's excursion, after all. It wouldn't do to examine their findings ahead of him. Instead, she remained on her vessel, patiently awaiting his return. An elder lich from the Royal Army headquarters would contact her once every 30 minutes for a status update. Otherwise, she was left mostly alone to dwell on His Majesty's questions and a way in which she had answered them. I said too much. Like her friend, Clara, Ludmilla had no desire to mince words when it came to matters of crucial importance. Nor would she consider lying to His Majesty over their most recent topic. She would not have answered differently, but that did not mean that regrets were absent in the wake of her reply. The Sorcerer King surely knew everything she spoke of and more besides. Speaking of histories he was well aware of was akin to relating the tales of a famous figure to the figure himself. She didn't know what had come over her. The stream of disjointed and poorly constructed rationale must have sounded laughably inept to His Majesty. As she agonized over her response and what it might mean for the future, a looming figure drifted into her peripheral vision. At first, she thought it was one of the elementals, returned for some reason. After looking over, however, she found herself staring at a wall that stood in the water. Ludmilla blinked several times, unsure of what she was looking at. Her eyes followed glowing, wooden boards until they came across a massive hole in the wall. On the other side of its jagged, curled-up edges was what looked like the interior of a building. A number of wights, skeleton mages and skeleton warriors looked back at her. Her gaze moved upwards until they found a railing over 3 meters above the waterline. Behind the railing were 3 towering masts with tattered sails. It was a ship, one that she imagined would have been more at home sailing the seas of the world. One that looked to be 3 times the length of her own. How the ship stayed afloat in its condition or how its tattered sails could be of any use was beyond her. She scanned the railing until she came across the crimson-eyed gaze of an undead being, who was looking back down at her. It took less than a second for her to realize that it was not in the form of a human. Massive hands ending in sharp claws clutched the railing, and the being itself was a good meter taller than she was. A skeletal frame filled out its tattered brown robes, and its barrel chest made it look more a warrior than anything else. After some thought, Ludmilla decided that if it had living flesh, it would have been something like one of the Kronos Rangers. A Felia-type beastman, albeit a good meter shorter than the ones living in her domain. The skeletal beastman examined her vessel in return. The points of his eyes moved away from her, over the Death Knights, Death Priests and Vampire Brides in the hold, to the Death Warrior and its skeleton crew. It then looked to its left and right, to its own crew of wights, skeleton mages and skeleton warriors, then its gaze returned to her. "Mine's bigger," it said in a gruff, masculine voice. "Much bigger," Ludmilla replied diplomatically. A snort came in response, and the undead beastman leaned its elbows on the railing. "I've not seen you around these parts. I'd have certainly remembered such a fine lady if I had. Whose ensign are you flying, miss?" Ludmilla straightened, then lowered her head in a curtsy. "Apologies for my late introduction," she said. "Baroness Ludmilla Zaradnik, of the Sorceress Kingdom. Iscar, captain of the Ruins Wake. It's a pleasure to meet you, Baroness Zaradnik." "The pleasure is all mine, Captain Iscar." Ludmilla smiled up at him, not quite sure what else to say. The Sorcerer King had mentioned something about the vessel's existence, but she hadn't expected it to sail right up to her. At least Captain Iscar was polite. He had a polished, charming air to him, one that differed dramatically from the depictions of intelligent undead in tales. Then again, so did many of the undead servitors of the Sorcerer King. "It won't do to have us talking like this," he said. "Would you like to come aboard, my lady? You don't plan on whisking me away somewhere?" "Perish the thought." Iscar laughed. "We're all proper gentlemen here. Besides, those are your elementals working out there, aren't they? We wouldn't get very far if we tried sailing off with you. What makes you think that the elemental monoliths are mine?" "Well, the members of your retinue are too weak to summon those monstrosities, but there's quite a lot of mana coming off of your esteemed person." Iscar could detect mana. Did that mean that, despite his imposing physique, he was an elder lich? A quick assessment put him at around the same level as Nonna. If he had hostile intentions, an Elder Lich probably wouldn't invite their target into close quarters. Ludmilla activated her hairpin and flew up to join him. The height of the deck offered a commanding view of the surroundings, but the mist still limited her vision. "Thank you for your invitation, Captain." "Just Iscar is fine," he replied. "It's always good to have visitors from abroad. How far off is this sorceress kingdom that you hail from?" The Elder Lich's skeletal tail waved lazily back and forth. He seemed completely at ease, at least if his body language matched that of the living. "Not far away," Ludmilla said. "Right next door, actually. The border is about 200 kilometers upriver." "Well, that's grand news," Iscar exclaimed. "We've been surrounded by the living for as long as I can remember, so it's nice to finally have some proper and friendly neighbors." She wondered what he meant by that. Was it the fact that the surrounding nations sent forces to suppress the undead along their borders? Perhaps, like their mindless counterparts, intelligent undead who manifested naturally harbored the same views towards the living. Most of the local law suggested this, though her recent experiences often made her wonder if it was really the case. "Were you born here?" "Sure was," the Elder Lich replied. "I came into being about 150 years ago in Old Lagers, the big city just south of here." Lagers. At long last, they had a name. "The people in the region don't seem to have any names for the locations in this place," she said. "It's just the Katza Plains to them." "Where did you come across the name of the city?" "Because I was born here?" He looked at her strangely. "You're born knowing all sorts of things, right? Like how to cast the spells that you manifested with. Skills and abilities too. You can't say you don't know where you were born, can you?" Ludmilla knew where she had been born as a human, but that was knowledge gained after she matured enough to communicate. She had no idea what the place she rose as a revenant was called. "I was hoping you could shed some light on the history of this place," she said. "When it was occupied by the living." "Ah, I see. Yeah, I get that way sometimes too. You get so focused on figuring something out that everything revolves around it. You don't look like an Elder Lich, though. I thought that was just something we did." "I'm a revenant." "A revenant?" Iscar tapped his chin with a claw. "I can't say I've heard of those before." "Well, not like it's unexpected. The more powerful undead get, the less normal they seem to be. There's a bunch of odd fellows in Corpus, too." She furrowed her brow at the unknown reference. "Corpus? Haven't heard of them?" The Elder Lich seemed to frown, then shrugged. "Well, I guess we are out on the edge of nowhere. Corpus of the Abyss is a sort of loose association for cognizant undead. If I understand things correctly, it used to be all hush-hush, but they've started branching out to be more substantial, if you get what I mean. Most of them still stick to their own business, but a handful have gone into some pretty interesting ventures. I wasn't aware there were any places for the undead to branch out to. Where there's life, there's death, yeah? I wouldn't be surprised if there are plenty of places like our cozy little home here." "So you're a member of this Corpus of the Abyss?" "More like a customer. One of their more prominent members founded something like a merchant company. Every 5 years or so, some of their agents come by to trade. I hear that they're even willing to deal with the living if you can believe that. There's another guy that founded some sort of cabal with living members, too. Sir something. Strange, huh?" For an Elder Lich, at least those with whom she was familiar with, Iscar was very chatty. Maybe he was just excited about meeting someone new. "I suppose it would depend on the living you're used to dealing with," she said. "On that note, it's part of the reason why I'm here. We're mapping the river's course and charting a navigable route to the inland sea beyond. Once we've established a few things, our nation will be engaging in trade with whoever is willing to deal with us." "Interesting. What will you be selling? Magic items? Scrolls? Research materials?" "That would be up to our merchants," Ludmilla replied. "I assume that they will work with any market that is open to us. Since the nation was founded on an agrarian territory, the bulk of our exports will be grain, lumber, and the like. Undead servitors minimize the cost of labor, so we expect our products to be quite competitive." "I see," Iscar said. "I'm no good at the whole merchant thing, but it does seem like an efficient way to secure resources if you can find someone willing to trade with you. We have to get by on salvage here. Those Corpus guys may as well be using turn undead on us when they quote their prices." Ludmilla tried to imagine a cabal of Elder Liches fleeing in terror from a merchant. So far, Iscar made them seem like normal people, or was that because they were all fellow undead? Things should be looking up in the near future, she said. My domain was quite poor before the Sorceress Kingdom annexed the territory it was in, and I feel that we're doing very well for ourselves now. Even knowledge has value, so you may find that you have more to offer than you think. I sure hope that's the case, he replied. We tried that once, trading the hard-earned knowledge from our research. Those corpus merchants just turned up their noses like it was all beneath them. I'm sorry to hear that, Ludmilla frowned. My house has had its share of poor experiences with merchants. Living or undead, it seemed that there were always those who callously tread on the hard work of others. You're not a merchant then? House Zaradnik is a militant noble house. Most of my friends are from merchant houses, however. I believe that they can be trusted to conduct business in good faith. The elder lich paused at that. His tail settled on the deck. Friends, huh? He rubbed his jaw. It's strange that we've never heard of the Sorceress Kingdom until now, especially when it's right next to us. The way you make it sound, the undead there have had more than enough time to create communities of their own. How long have you been there for now? The Sorceress Kingdom was founded at the end of this last winter. I was a scion of Riestize's nobility before that. Captain Iscar crossed his arms over his ribcage. He tilted his gaze upwards, leaning one way, then the other. I'll admit that I'm getting slightly confused. As far as I know, Riestize is a human nation, one of the ones that keeps sending pesky adventurers into the plains. That's right. And they just happen to have a bunch of undead aristocrats? Ah, no, I was a human until recently. Iscar scratched his bare skull with a clawed hand. So this Sorceress Kingdom took the land from Riestize a bit over half a year ago. Yes. I think I get it. Are revenants a species of intelligent undead that can turn others into more of themselves, like vampires? Not that I know of, Ludmilla said. My liege is a vampire, but she had nothing to do with my undead state. The vast majority of the Sorceress Kingdom's subjects number amongst the living. The friends that I spoke of were friends that I made when I was a human. The elder lich put his hands on his hips, blowing out a sigh. Well, now I'm just plain confused. Did someone rewrite the rules of the world while I wasn't looking? Is that even possible? There is strong circumstantial evidence that points to it happening at least once in the past. That's not one of those bits of knowledge I can sell, is it? I have no idea. Perhaps His Majesty would be interested, but it was something that amounted to a useless piece of trivia for most. I suppose this discussion should be left for later. Now that we know about each other, will the Sorceress Kingdom be sending someone who is authorized to negotiate on its behalf? Yes, as a matter of fact, Ludmilla replied. He should be returning soon. Gifts? Yes, Ludmilla replied. Gifts. A diplomatic gesture. The message it conveys is more important than its material value. Since you are representing the residents here, it would be something like a sign of the relationship that you desire between your people and the Sorceress Kingdom. Captain Iscar's foot tapped rhythmically on the deck, his claws playing over the wooden boards. The ship's glow intensified, and he raised his foot. Oh, sorry. The glow of the boards dimmed, and Ludmilla studied the ship. Every part of it was imbued with negative energy. Rather than being an inanimate object, the ghost ship was an undead being in its own right, one that she sensed was at least as powerful as a Death Knight. How a ghost ship fought or what capabilities one possessed were entirely unknown to her. Ruin's Wake seems quite sensitive to some things. A finicky one, she is, Captain Iscar nodded. She's the only ghost ship around here, so I'm not sure if it's just her that acts like that or if it's all of them. Ruin's Wake didn't take well to being scratched, yet there was a huge hole in the side of her hull and her sails were worn into strips of tattered cloth. Did she not mind because it was supposed to be a part of her appearance? Perhaps a ghost ship's existence was similar to Ludmilla's own in the way that she maintained her previous form. How does a ghost ship manifest? Ludmilla asked. Most of the undead around here appear to be ordered as an echo of the civilization that once stood here. Up until this point, however, what we've seen have been undead versions of living things. I guess she just took a liking to this ship. That's quite novel. Ludmilla traced her fingers over the railing. Is she a form of spectral undead that possessed the ship, or did her pre-manifested presence animate the wreck itself? The latter, Captain Iscar said. Something like animating a corpse? If you'll excuse me, my lady, I'll be heading down into the hold to see if there's anything that might be appropriate for this gesture. Of course, Captain, Ludmilla smiled. Please don't restrain yourself on my account. The elder lich turned and walked away, heading into some sort of structure in the rear of the ruin's wake. Ludmilla's gaze returned to study the ship. Her Na was the largest vessel that she knew of, and much of the ghost ship's construction was strange to her. Piecing together the ship's various details, she tried to imagine the resplendent image that such a vessel would have presented when it was crewed by the living. In its heyday, it must have traveled from the river to the seas and the world beyond. What sights have you seen, I wonder? Ludmilla murmured as she slowly walked along the railing. She continued to study the details of the ship, then suddenly realized how strange it was for the ship to have certain details at all. They were mostly rotted away, but it was unlike what they had seen before, where all identifying elements had been thoroughly destroyed. Curious, she activated her hairpin and flew slowly around the hull, looking for any external markings or embellishments that might convey the ship's former identity. The sides of the vessel were lined by what appeared to be ports with rusted metal hinges. Ludmilla floated closer to one of them. Can this be opened? With a metallic squeak, the cover swung open on its own. The frame of the port was lined with the same metal, which also appeared to rib the sides of the ship. She stuck her head in to look at the hold's interior, noting what appeared to be metal plates on each side of the port. A quick glance showed the same scheme all along the deck. Her first thought was that it was similar to how brigandine armor was fashioned, with metal plates spaced in the suit. Instead of protecting its wearer, however, these plates probably protected the archers or mages that manned each port. Though she had never seen its like, the ship's construction suggested that it was a vessel made for war. A thought occurred to her, and she flew to the aft of the ship. She found Captain Iscar a deck lower than where he had entered. He opened the window, which was nothing but a window frame, to speak to her. Is something the matter, my lady? I was just studying the exterior of Ruin's Wake, Ludmilla replied. Was there anything like an emblem or a name on the hull somewhere? Right down here. Captain Iscar pointed to a spot below the window. Bare traces of lettering were carved into what was once a proud wooden placard. Ludmilla narrowed her eyes, trying to make out what it said. Strangely, some of it was familiar, enough to guess at what was displayed. Does this say Ruin's Wake? I was born knowing all sorts of things, the elder lich said, but the local language wasn't one of them. Since you were formerly of the local living population, you've got the advantage over me there. That aside, Ruin's Wake knew her name when she came into existence as a ghost ship without knowing the local language either. If that's the case, what language do you use to record your research? The one I was born knowing, Captain Iscar replied. Seems every elder lich knows it as well, no matter where they're from. Since you're turned? Reconstituted? Reconstituted, I think? Interesting. Anyway, the results of being turned varies on the strength of the undead, but since you're reconstituted, you're who you were before. You get to keep what you knew, but at the same time, you don't have the same inborn knowledge that the rest of us do. Not that I hold anything against you, of course, you're obviously a fine and proper lady. The corner of Ludmilla's mouth twitched. Out of curiosity, she said, do the rest of your colleagues convey themselves as you do? I've interacted with other elder liches before, and they're boring? They're all interesting in their own way, but they all have a rather flat delivery. Sounds about right, Captain Iscar said. I guess we're all born that way, and shutting oneself away to do research for decades doesn't help much in changing that. As you can see, however, I do get around. The elder lich captain swept his arm out broadly, cocking his head in what Ludmilla thought should be a roguish expression if he possessed the features to show it. Have you had interactions with the living before? That didn't involve running, screaming and electrospheres? He replied, maybe one. The living organize themselves in an annoying way. It's easy to reach the ones that aren't worth keeping alive, but anywhere with anyone worth your while tends to be protected by soldiers and the like. It should be rare for most places to have personnel who can stand up to an elder lich of your strength. I was a wee elder lich when I first tried over a century ago. Captain Iscar chuckled at some memory, which may or may not have been the best of ideas. That being said, all sorts of things still come flying out at me now, no matter how well I polish up my diction. Well, I for one appreciate your efforts, Ludmilla said. You make a good impression. Captain Iscar seemed taken aback. Really? He scratched his cheek. Thank you for saying so, my lady. It's nice to know that all that wasn't for nothing. The elder lich withdrew from the window, reappearing again to hold out a box in the palm of his clawed hand. Some effort had gone into brushing away the mud caked upon it. What's this? I figured it'd make for a decent gift, he said. The gesture that you mentioned. Ah, I meant what's inside. Nothing, but it's the best box I have. Finding an intact container out here is next to impossible, never mind whatever's left of their contents. Ludmilla's gaze traveled from the box and up the elder leech's skeletal arm, eyeing the frayed sleeve of his tattered robe. Her lips turned down as she considered his circumstances. Captain Iscar seemed to wilt under her scrutiny. If it's not good enough. It's perfect, Ludmilla told him. Come with me, Captain. She flew around over the deck, waiting for Captain Iscar to join her. She led him down to the aft of her vessel, landing near the Death Warrior captain. The elder lich eyed it up and down. I like your hat, he said. Please wait here, Captain Iscar. He nodded at Ludmilla in response, and she turned to walk towards the hold, the pleasant expression wiped from her face. Chagrin rose within her as she reviewed her behavior around the elder lich. It wasn't something most would consider, but it was possible for the undead to be impoverished. In fact, most undead were poor, possessing nothing but what they manifested with. Ludmilla had taken his comments about the corpus merchants in the wrong way. It probably wasn't that their goods were exorbitantly expensive or he was being exploited in some manner, it was because he was literally destitute. Born in the ruins of a civilization scoured from the face of the land, Captain Iscar had only burned out ruins and sunken wreckage to work with. It was likely that his research was similarly meager, as magical research required extensive funding for materials and labor. If he raided the neighboring lands, it didn't show. His efforts to interact with his living neighbors lent to the idea that he was aware that securing a stable supply of what he wanted was better than driving everyone away for temporary gains. Captain Iscar was probably imitating the corpus merchants he interacted with, except he was attempting to ply the markets of the living or at least learn how to access resources and wealth. As he had mentioned, naturally manifested undead were born knowing many things, but ultimately only knew what they knew. Matters of industry and production were far from the starting point of an elder lich's existence. She doubted that the elder lich even had paper or writing instruments to record the research she had mentioned so offhandedly. An old, worn container was the best gift he could offer, and his tattered robes were probably what he had manifested with. By comparison, Ludmilla must have looked like she lived in the lap of luxury. She stepped down into the hold, kneeling at one of the low tables set up there. Even as a being vulnerable to fire, she felt that they emanated an inviting magical warmth. The vampire brides seated at the table were playing some sort of card game. Occasionally, one would take a sip from the glass of blood in front of her. May we help you with something, Lady Zaradnik? Captain Iscar of the Ruins Wake is awaiting an audience with His Majesty, she said. He is of modest means, so I was wondering if we have something presentable for him to wear. The vampire bride she was speaking with leaned back from the table, craning her pale neck to look past His Majesty's seat. There should be something appropriate available, she said after several moments. Have him come up here if you please, my lady. Several of the vampire brides stood up and started searching through the closets and drawers that they had installed in the hold. Ludmilla led Captain Iscar over, and another set of vampire brides came around to scrutinize his figure. The crimson points of the elder leech's eyes went back and forth between them. He jumped when one of the vampire brides poked a finger through a hole in his robe. What's going on? He asked. We're preparing you for an audience with the Sorcerer King. King? The Sorcerer King, Ludmilla corrected him. His Majesty is heading this excursion. You'll be dealing with him directly, so while the vampire brides take care of your appearance, there are some matters of etiquette that you and I must review. As the vampire brides had him try on 24 different outfits, Ludmilla went over an essential list of behaviors and expectations that one should observe when attending an audience with the sovereign. The crimson points of the elder leech's eyes seemed to swim in their empty sockets as she hammered out each topic. Captain Iscar tapped the tips of his claws together as he listened. The vampire brides went on matching fabrics and accessories to his skeletal frame. In the end, they settled on a myrtle jacket with flared cuffs over a white shirt with loose pants tucked into black leather boots. A sea-green mantle adorned his shoulders, and a black tricorn with a feather plume topped it all off. One of the vampire brides came over to speak with her, lowering her head apologetically. "Unfortunately, we don't have an eye patch, my lady." "He needs an eye patch?" Ludmilla couldn't imagine what the point of an eye patch would be. Captain Iscar's eyes seemed perfectly fine. The elder leech's clawed hands hovered over the rich felt material of his garb, as if afraid to damage it. Then he brought out his gift. His gaze slowly went back and forth between the worn box and his borrowed outfit. Is this really all right? I'm just a humble elder lich from the middle of nowhere. I must be in way over my head." "Just remember what I said," Ludmilla told him. "The Sorcerer King holds audience with all manner of peoples, so do not dwell on the material value of your gift. It is the meaning conveyed in your gesture that matters." Captain Iscar seemed to swallow. "Oh, and if you commit any grave breaches in decorum," Ludmilla said, "Lady Shiltir will likely obliterate you." If my lady does not," she added, "I will at least give you a good whack." "Ludmilla?" "Yes, my lady?" "We're all done here. How are things out there?" "No threats have appeared, but I wouldn't say things have been uneventful. I came across a gentleman, or rather, he came across me, and now he's awaiting an audience with His Majesty." There was a pause in the message spell. Ludmilla could almost imagine Lady Shiltir's befuddled look. "A gentleman? Out there?" "Yes, my lady. An elder lich. Iscar, captain of the Ruin's Wake. I believe it was the ship His Majesty was asking about." A longer pause. Half a minute later, the portal of a gate spell opened over the bow of her vessel. From the stool where he was seated, Captain Iscar leaned forward to peer at it. "Lord Ines wishes to question you personally about this elder lich before we return." "Of course, my lady. Allow me a moment to speak to him before I enter the portal." The message spell ended, and Ludmilla turned to address Captain Iscar. "His Majesty has requested that I personally brief him about the past few hours, Captain Iscar," she told him. "I will return once I've done so." "All right," the elder lich nodded. Before you go, might I ask what this portal is?" "It's the portal of a gate spell," Ludmilla replied as she walked over to the bow. "Simply put, it's a sort of teleportation spell. Of the 10th tier." 10th. Captain Iscar's voice cut off as she entered the portal and the gate closed behind her. Ludmilla found herself in a luxurious bedroom suite roughly the size of the bedroom of Clara's Solar in Calling Castle. Though all the furnishings that one might have expected if such a room were present, there was the distinct sense that it wasn't lived in. Boxes and bags were organized around the floor. Were they using this extravagant space to house supplies for their excursion? "Welcome to Nazarick, Lady Zaradnik." She turned at the Sorcerer King's voice. "That being said," he went on, "we'll only be here for a few minutes. I'm sure Shiltir can have you over some other time for a proper tour." Nearby, Lady Shiltir looked up at him, surprise painted all over her face. Is that really all right, Lord Ines?" His Majesty nodded. "As with any of our past and current guests, the same basic rules apply. You don't believe she'd bring any harm, do you?" Lady Shiltir glanced towards Ludmilla briefly, then she lowered her head. "Of course not. I will have her over at a later date, by your command." "That's not exactly what I was getting at." His Majesty seemed to frown at Lady Shiltir's response. "Well, I suppose it's as good a start as any. Now, I hear that there is someone awaiting an audience with me." "Captain." "He goes by Iscar, Your Majesty. A native of Lagos, the city that we were making our way towards." "Oh, and just like that, we have a name." "Yes, Your Majesty." The Sorcerer King stroked his chin, jaw moving as if silently repeating the name to himself. Had he made a connection from the vast pool of knowledge he possessed? Ultimately, he did not make his thoughts known, instead addressing Ludmilla again. "What else have you learned?" "There were a few things of note during our conversation on matters beyond my knowledge or awareness," she replied. "I believe they would be better left for those with true expertise to pursue. I was mostly getting to know him as a person. He's surprisingly normal." "Normal?" "At least by human standards, Your Majesty. He is courteous, seems open-minded and appears to be well-meaning. A part of me suspects that this is because he was speaking to another undead being, but he and his partner are looking to improve their lot in life and have embarked on various trade ventures. Unfortunately for them, none of their efforts have met with any success thus far. Who is this partner of his? Ruin's Wake, Your Majesty, the ghost ship. I see. What did they say about the Sorceress Kingdom annexing the area? I felt that it would be better for Your Majesty to make the offer, as both the leader of our excursion and the head of state. His Majesty nodded silently. The crimson points of his eyes winked out as they seemed to whenever weighty matters required thought. Ludmilla took the time to scan the room. A blonde maid with eyeglasses stood by inside the closed door, one she had seen in Rantal's central district on several occasions. Did you get a sense of their strength? The Sorcerer King's eyes flared back to life, and Ludmilla turned her attention back to him as she replied. Captain Iscar is about the strength of Nonna, the Elder Lich Adjutant assigned to me by the Central Administration. Ruin's Wake is about as strong as a Death Series servitor. Since she is a ghost ship, it is difficult for me to make an accurate assessment of her combat capabilities. Nonna? My apologies, Your Majesty. It's the name I came up with for her. She's a white counterfeiter, Lady Shaltier filled in. Thank you, my lady, Ludmilla nodded. In addition, they have an undead crew that seems to have been collected from the area using the captain's undead domination skill. Skeleton warriors, at best. I believe that covers everything that I wanted to ask. Was there anything else you'd like to add, Lady Zaradnik? Ludmilla hesitated to provide a response, unsure as to how she might properly convey her thoughts. In the end, however, she decided it was best to say things plainly. They're poor, Your Majesty. Poor? As in impoverished. It's not difficult to understand why. They were born in a stripped and burned-out ruin. Since I was once destitute myself, I can't help but feel for him. Upon our meeting, Captain Iscar was wearing a tattered brown robe and nothing else. Despite being an Elder Lich, it makes him look like he might be picked on by the surrounding humans instead. For the time being, I had the vampire brides arrange suitable garb for a royal audience. His Majesty remained silent after she spoke. Ludmilla wondered what he might be thinking about. Perhaps he was just as taken aback at the notion that an Elder Lich could be down on his luck. Why doesn't he raid the surrounding area? The Sorcerer King held out a hand as he asked. An Elder Lich and a ghost ship crewed by skeleton warriors shouldn't have any issues with most of the surrounding territories. It goes back to what I mentioned about his trade ventures. The Katsa Plains is nothing but dust and rubble, so he's been trying to establish connections with the living to secure a reliable flow of resources. From what he mentioned of his younger days, some of those attempts went quite badly for him. The Sorcerer King raised a hand to tap his jaw thoughtfully. So since he's been trying to build up his reputation as a merchant, he's refrained from hostile acts against neighboring territories. That appears to be how it is, Ludmilla nodded. He's clearly made efforts to become more personable than the average Elder Lich. Since their objectives do not appear to be at odds with our national policies, I thought that we might be able to arrive at an amicable arrangement. Would this be possible, Your Majesty? Assuming that all he has shared with you is true, I don't see any immediate problems with it. I do have some doubts, however. The living tend to be anathema to naturally spawned undead, as you should know. Yes, Your Majesty, Ludmilla lowered her head. Thank you for taking my words into consideration. Arbitrarily dismissing counsel from loyal subordinates is the hallmark of a foolish leader, the Sorcerer King told her. You have been entrusted with a position of authority, do not make it any less than what it is. With that, they made preparations for the impromptu audience. Ludmilla went over Lady Shaltier's lines with her in a corner of the room while His Majesty appeared to be conversing with someone using message. Once all was readied, Ludmilla returned to the ship ahead of them. Captain Iscar looked up at the sound of her feet alighting on the deck. Is everything all right? The Elder Lich's voice was shakier than it was before. It was such that Ludmilla thought that his bones might fly apart. Are you all right, Captain Iscar? She asked worriedly. You sound like you're about to crumble away. Why, you're kidding, right? The Elder Lich wrung his hands nervously. You just casually mentioned magic of the T10th tier before vanishing into that portal. If I knew that the Sorcerer King was... that wasn't the Sorcerer King's portal, Ludmilla told him. It was Lady Shaltier who cast it. His Majesty is capable of even more powerful magics. The 3-meter-tall beastman frame of the Elder Lich wilted. Can I go home now? Ludmilla reached up and patted him on the shoulder, offering him a reassuring smile. His Majesty will be here right away, she said. Just follow my lead and you'll be fine. Lady Shaltir emerged from the gate, her heels tapping against the deck as she stepped to one side. Ludmilla went to a knee and lowered her head. Captain Iscar hastily followed suit. Along either side of the hold, the vampire brides knelt as well. The Death Knights, Death Priests, Death Warrior and the rest of the undead crew snapped to attention behind them. Her liege's silvery voice chimed clearly over the assembly, announcing the arrival of His Majesty the Sorcerer King, Ainzul Gown. The hem of the Sorcerer King's luxurious black robes crossed her vision. It was followed by Lady Shaltir's blood-red silhouettes as they made their way from the bow of the vessel to the canopied throne. A minute passed before Lady Shaltir's voice sounded through the air again. His Majesty permits you to raise your heads. Ludmilla waited for several heartbeats before rising to her feet. Captain Iscar, however, only made it halfway. With a single glance at the Sorcerer King, he fell on his hands and knees, crawling to the space in the hold below the throne. As he scrambled forward, the box that was his gift bounced over the carpet to rest at His Majesty's feet. The Elder Leech's skull made a hollow thunk sound as his forehead hit the wooden deck. "Oh, Supreme Ruler of Death," he cried out, "your humble servant beseeches you to grant us your mercy and protection. We are as dust beneath your feet, but we shall serve you in any way that you desire." Deafening silence followed his outburst. Lady Shaltir narrowed her eyes, stepping forward from her place beside the throne. Ludmilla suppressed a sigh. The air seemed to freeze over at her liege's quiet, yet deadly tone. "Base cur!" Her enraged hiss washed over them. "You dare cast your wretched offer at His Majesty's feet uninvited." Lady Shaltir raised her left hand, pointing a gauntleted finger at the groveling Elder Lich. "This is the only mercy you deserve. Implosi Shaltir." The Sorcerer King raised a hand. Lady Shaltir interrupted her spell and returned to her place beside him. "Baroness Saradnik has spoken well of you, Captain Iscar," His Majesty said. "So I shall forgive you for this indiscretion." Another thought drifted up from the quivering ball of an Elder Lich as he smacked his forehead on the deck again. He struck his head so hard against the wooden boards that his health visibly dropped in Ludmilla's life essence. She hoped that he wouldn't leave a hole in her ship by the end of the audience. "Now," the Sorcerer King said, "I've been informed of your circumstances, so what I tell you should be to your benefit. The Sorceress Kingdom will be extending its dominion over the Katsa Plains. As residents of this territory, you will naturally become my subjects. You have our eternal thanks, your Dark Majesty." Captain Iscar banged his head on the deck again. "If your humble servant might ask, what is to become of our home?" Beyond Clara's plan to use the Katsa River as a major artery for trade, Ludmilla was uncertain what else might be in store for the region. Restoring the land to an arable state would generate great benefits for the Sorceress Kingdom's living population, but she wasn't sure if it was possible. As far as she knew, all attempts at reclamation had failed. It could also be left as it was, turning it into a place for intelligent undead subjects like Captain Iscar and Ruin's Wake. Both represented promising avenues for development. The latter would depend on how many natural undead flocked to the banner of the Sorceress Kingdom, but the potential represented by their unending lifespans was not to be understated. The Sorcerer King made a graceful gesture with his left hand, and Lady Shaltir leaned forward to pick up Iscar's gift from the dark carpet. She presented it to His Majesty, who examined the item as he spoke. "The final decision for the territory will be pending a thorough analysis of the various options available to us," the Sorcerer King told him. "As for the residents, I hear that you and your partner have been attempting to establish trade with the neighboring populations. I believe that you will begin to experience success from this point onwards." "Truly, your Dark Majesty?" The Sorcerer King nodded. "It has been less than a year since the official founding of my nation, so the various peoples and cultures under my rule still have much to grow accustomed to. However, you will not be driven away as you have in the past. The rest is, as they say, your business." Captain Iscar visibly trembled, as if divided between looking up at His Majesty and lowering himself further into the deck somehow. I am at a loss as to what to say. What must I do in exchange for this great boon?" "All races are welcome in the Sorceress Kingdom," the Sorcerer King told him. "There are, of course, laws that must be observed. You must cooperate with the local authorities in order to minimize potential disturbances caused by your passage. Also, I suppose you do not need roads, so tolls are similarly not applicable, but you are still subject to trade taxes and harbor fees. You will be received as any other trader in my nation, and expectations for their conduct similarly apply to you. My experience with the living has been notably absent of any success, Captain Iscar said, so I fear that I may run afoul of local laws and customs. Are there other undead traders in your realm that I might consult with? His Majesty seemed to find the elder leech's query amusing, and he rested his bony cheek against the knuckles of his left hand. Though undead are employed by local merchant companies, you will be the first undead trader. Hopefully, you will not be the last. In addition, merchants tend to exact a price for everything, even advice and consultation. As you would not be able to afford it, but I believe there is someone who may be willing to assist you. Who might this kind individual be, Your Dark Majesty? Countess Clara Corlin, the Sorcerer King replied. She administers the Riverland territories that border the Katza Plains. Utilizing the Katza River system as a conduit for trade is her initiative, so you should be able to exchange your knowledge and expertise of the region for her help. Captain Iscar's head thunked on the deck again. I will gladly do this. We are most thankful for Your Dark Majesty's guidance. Good, the Sorcerer King gave a regal nod of his head. Now that everything is settled, we should continue with our excursion. Captain Iscar, would you like to give us a tour of Lagos? Of course, the Elder Lich replied. It would be our greatest honor to do so.